And I did not have a healthy relationship with my own father. So this was really important to me. I had kids. In fact, a little bit of the backstory is that Paul and I were not believers when we had our oldest daughter. And there's 11 years between our oldest daughter and our next child. And those last 3 kids were 100% chosen by God and came out of our relationship with Jesus Christ, right? We weren't going to have any more kids. And so God gave us 3 more kids, and he gave us Jacob. And he gave us Jacob for 24 years. And we were so blessed. So it was important to me to be in relationship. What did that relationship look like when someone was suffering from substance use? And then I said, if my son got sober, would he want to have a relationship with the God that I believed in? Because the God that I think a lot of kids see in the Christian church is a God of hypocrisy, right? Where we show up one way for church on Sunday, and then what happens in our home is different. And I knew that my son was wrestling with his faith, and he was trying to figure this out. And I wanted to represent the Jesus that I believe was in the Bible. And I say this often, but this was the Jesus that showed up at the Last Supper knowing that Judas was going to betray him and Peter was going to deny him. This was the Jesus that ran into the ugliness. This was the Jesus that hung out with the leopards and healed them, right? This wasn't the Jesus that sat in a church pew singing hymns. He was in it. He was in it. And we wanted to be that. And we know that we failed a lot. So we had to make up for some lost time. We really did. And then the last thing was I living as if? Because even back then, I knew that in addiction, people die, right? People die. And I wanted to live and interact with my son as if this were the last words I said to him, what would he hear? If this was the last text message I sent to him, what would he see? If this were the last, look on my face, would he see love and acceptance, or would he see disappointment? Right? And through that, and I say we because my husband was so right along with me. I didn't have to do this alone, but we really purposed at that time to be intentional and to change our way of being with our son. And I was done, and you've heard this a million times, I'm done, right? I'm done. But I was done in a different way, not in the way that you would imagine. I was done treating my son like he was bad rather than like he was ill. And, Saul touched on this a little bit, but I think as Christians, sometimes we just feel like we just have to be such truth tellers that we feel responsible to call out sin, And the truth is that, and what Saul said was that the root of addiction is pain, right? It's not that people are just wanting to flip you off and like love hurting everyone around them, right? And the neuroscience and the behavioral science and all the evidence. And he mentioned, like, you can call it a disorder, you can call it a disease, you can call it sin, but the bottom line is that if you learn what is behind the addiction, it's pain, right? And when I feel this way, I can use this and I know I'm gonna feel better, right? I feel anxiety, I can take a pill, I'm gonna feel better. I feel disconnected to my peers, I can drink this alcohol and all of a sudden I'm the life of the party. I feel pain physically, right? I can take this pill and I don't feel any more pain. I emotionally feel pain because there was trauma in my life. Maybe I was abused or neglected. And I can take this pill and the pain goes away. on the night my son died, he saved a friend of his with naloxone. And this friend was in a treatment center with him in Utah back in June, and we went to the family program. And it's super interesting what Danny said. And Danny said, I'm only miserable and I only suffer if I stop using. And I thought that was so profound, because the suffering in addiction and the pain in addiction is so strong and so powerful that it keeps you going back to the addiction. Because when I use, I don't feel that pain, right? And we have to remember that when we're dealing with people. And maybe the addiction isn't substances. Maybe the addiction is food. Maybe the addiction is people pleasing. Maybe the addiction is way prettier than, someone using meth. And we all end up sort of craving, right, comfort out of the world, and we know that comfort can only come from the Lord. But what I really started learning about was that the addiction changes the brain. Saul talked about this a little bit. And once it's activated, boy, it's hard to stop it. It's hard to stop it. And it really is. It becomes the solution, right? I began to stop taking the disease. I was done taking the disease personally, right? The behaviors in the disease. We as family, we love to play the victim. We love to play the victim. And do you know that's why I'm standing up here right now? It's because I read this little quip from Brene Brown right before I decided to come, and it says, we get to write our own daring endings. We don't have to become characters in our story. Not villains, not victims, not even heroes. But we live in that place oftentimes of being a victim. And when I took the behaviors of the disease personally, it was easy for me to adopt that victim mentality, right? And we know that oftentimes it does feel personal. If you have someone who has ever suffered, if you have been stolen from, if you have been lied to, if you have been manipulated, if you have been a victim of abuse from someone who is suffering from addiction, it feels very personal. But I can tell you 100% because he wrote this, he did not want to hurt his family. My son didn't want to harm anybody. Mm-hmm. He wanted recovery. Mm-hmm. He wanted to be well. And when we were able to separate the behaviors of the addiction and the behaviors that come with that from who our son really was as a person, it really changed the dynamic in our family. Because it wasn't about us, you guys. It's not about you. I'm sorry, it's not about you. It just isn't. And we were able to interact with him differently, knowing that this really, really wasn't him. And in fact, it allowed us, I have a friend who is just a prolific writer, and he said, I don't believe that people are inherently broken. I just think they've forgotten who they are. Mm-hmm. And when we stop taking the disease of addiction personally, we can remind our people who they really are. Mm-hmm. And we can sing them back home. I love that. Right?
Yeah.
I was done instigating confrontation. And we know that we recognize there's a need for an intervention, and we see what is on TV, and we see society. We're born into this war on drugs. And so when we understand that someone is struggling, we think of it in terms of war, right? We're in a battle, and we're in a war, and we are, but what happens is that warring heart goes out to my loved one. And the best book I ever read, which I would recommend to everybody, is a book called The Anatomy of Peace. And in it talks about changing our warring heart to a heart of peace. And what it is about is unconditional positive regard. You know what? Our loved ones, even in their struggle, are human beings. They're people who are deserving of love simply because God created them. And if we understand the gospel of grace, it's not about what we do, right? It's about what he did for us. And yet we enter into this confrontation and this conflict of forgetting the gospel of love and the gospel of grace. And so what we had to do was we had to look at our own patterns. And this was hard, right? Because in the 3 C's it says, you didn't cause it, you can't control it, you can't cure it. So we sort of land on that. We didn't cause it, but we contribute to it. We contribute to it by the way we interact with our loved ones, by the way we treat them. Mm-hmm. And so we had to stop contributing to the chaos and the conflict in our family. And we had to learn new patterns of behaviors. Like I said, we didn't learn how to communicate well in our families. We didn't talk about things. I hadn't even heard the word collaboration probably until 5 or 6 years ago when I started this work. And it seems counterintuitive that I could collaborate with someone that is using substances. But what we have learned through research and data and evidence is that if we allow a person to think that it's their idea, they buy into it, and that's what collaboration is all about. What do you want to do? What do you think you need? How can we agree on something together? When you tell someone what to do, it activates their natural rebellion. And we had gotten into that pattern. You need to, you have to, you should, you must. You know, if only, right? You just have to stop. You just have to stop. It wasn't that simple. If it was that simple, my son would still be alive because he wanted to live. And, you know, there's a saying, the opposite of addiction is connection. And here's the thing, you guys. As a believer, you have no influence without connection. You have no influence without connection. And if your relationship is all about confrontation, it's not going to work, right? So what we did was we were intentional about connection. And we created moments of connection even when it was difficult. I'll just tell you this story that Jake's last relapse was a pretty bad one. It was in April. And, you know, he'd been to 13 treatments, 14 treatments. I don't know, we kind of lost count once we got into the double digits. And he had another relapse. Now, because of connection and a relationship, he called us, right? He called us and said, hey, I need help. And, you know, my sweet husband took his laptop out to Colorado for 6 days and hung out with my son and just connected with him until he could get him into detox. And because of the fact that we had intentionally created moments of connection, we got Lazarus time, you guys. We had so many pictures that we didn't even know which ones to use with him because we had so many good moments and good memories. And the last 5 years, there were bad moments, right? There were hard times. One of the things that my other son described him in the service was that he was a tenacious son of a gun, only he didn't say gun. and if you looked at his coins, it was, you know, a newcomer, 30, 60, 90, newcomer, 30, he just kept trying. And, you know, I think about the opportunities that would have been lost if we would have responded to him and said, don't call us until you get sober. I honestly expected that he would have died far sooner if we would have responded that way. Yeah. And we didn't, and we have a gift because of it. My Jake's girlfriend said, you know, the addiction didn't lose, right? It didn't steal our son, right? We won. And we won because of our Lazarus time. And so we had to step out of this idea of being mean and unkind and nasty. Like, we had a license for it because he was the problem, right? We feel like it, even as Christians, sometimes we're, the idea of kindness in this, and here's what I'm going to challenge you guys about on this one, is that we say we love. I don't know a parent out there who wouldn't say they don't love their kid. They love their kid, but they don't act lovingly. I can say I love someone, but if I'm not kind, if I'm not empathetic, if I'm not compassionate, if I don't value them, and if they don't feel seen and heard, that's not love, you guys. And love isn't how I receive it. Love is how they receive it. For us, a big thing with connection and love was just going out to the mountains. Now, with everything, there's always caveats, right? And the caveat is safety. Like, there's a caveat for safety. If you're not safe, you have to set boundaries. So we learn to set boundaries. I tell this often. Our son did not live in our home after he turned 18 because it wasn't safe for us. It wasn't safe for our family. And actually, we couldn't really love him very well when he was in our home because he was violating every single rule that we had, every boundary that we had. And so we set a boundary. It was a safety boundary. I could do another whole, 4 sessions on boundaries, right? But we set a safety boundary. What's safe for us here is that you can either get well and live here, or you'll have to find somewhere else to live. But we did it even then in a way that was fairly honoring. And you do have to learn to set boundaries. Boundaries are safety boundaries. Boundaries are safety fences so that I can love you well, right? And the other thing we learned is we didn't have to punish him because he was already feeling enough shame and blame and, punishment and distress enough. But we did step out of the way, and we allowed for every natural consequence. And so sometimes we have to be careful because we can love so much that we get in the way of just letting them experience this struggle, right? And if we don't let them experience the struggle, I don't know about you, but I don't ever change unless there's a struggle, right? That's how we change. If I could just eat whatever I wanted to without consequence and my pants getting too tight, I would probably eat what I wanted to all the time, right? So I don't change unless I feel the struggle. And we felt the pain, and we changed as a result of that. So sometimes, that's how our Abba Daddy parents us, doesn't he? He loves us unconditionally, but he allows us the consequences of our choices. Mm-hmm. He doesn't get in the way of that. And even just going back to Jake and what happened, God didn't get in the way of the consequence of Jake's choice that night. And it's hard sometimes to swallow that, right? Because God could have. He probably could have intervened, but he didn't. God is a good God. He's a glorious, wonderful God. And I just want to say, God did not cause my son's death, right? The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. John 10:10, right? I came to bring you abundant life. Jake's free, right? Jake's free. Now, my job here on earth is to walk in John 10:10, right? He doesn't cause suffering. He didn't create sin. He didn't create the fallen world that we live in. What God created was good and perfect, right? We were done isolating and hiding behind shame and stigma. Like I said, the power of the story frees us when we tell it. And addiction, this is what I've said so often. We live in a world that glamorizes substance use, right? And you see it all the time. I've even heard laughter around the, beer evangelism, right? And I'll never forget watching, I think it was Adam Rippon, they were interviewing him, and he's an ice skater, he won the gold, and they were like, how do you handle your anxiety? And it's like, oh, I just pop a Xanny, right? And our culture glamorizes substance use all the time. It's on shows, it's on commercials, it's, and yet when someone gets ill from it, they shame them. And I believe there is a switch that is flipped in certain people. In the big book, they say the real alcoholic, the true alcoholic, where it happens just like that. And it happened just like that for my son. And, there is no shame in having a disease. And I think this is especially critical in the church. It is so important for the church to know this, because we put it on people. Like, I posted something yesterday on Facebook, and it was one pill can kill. And someone just said, Jesus. And I was actually really offended by that, because if it was that simple, like, no one would have sin in their lives. And battling addiction is not as simple as praying it away or having enough faith. And you would never say that to someone who's wearing glasses, like, come on, where's your faith? Why hasn't God healed your eyesight? Right? Where's your faith? Why hasn't God healed your cancer? Where's your faith? Why hasn't God taken away your diabetes? You're not praying hard enough. You don't have enough faith, and all you need is to believe in Jesus. It's just that simple, and it's not, right? And that's where the shame comes in, because my son got up every single morning trying to be sober, and it beat him down every single day. And I can tell you that those who struggle, they wake up every morning saying, today I'm not going to use. Today I'm going to be different. And I've had that struggle with my own behaviors. How many times have I said, today I'm going to talk less. I'm going to listen more. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be that, right? And every day we fail. And yet we have this expectation with people who struggle with strongholds, whatever it is, that we can just, if you just pray hard enough, and if you can't beat it, it's because you don't have enough faith. And all it does is turns people away from God. What they need is empathy and compassion. They need to know that we're walking with them through this, that we're there for them, and that no matter how many times they fall and how many times they fail, that we're going to be there. My son, we had such a blessing, because he spoke at one of our support groups a couple years ago, and somebody, he's like, well, my parents, they sort of, did the tough love. They just had boundaries, but they were always there for me, to support me. No matter how many times he failed, he would call us because he knew. And we weren't there. I just want to clarify, we didn't give him money. We weren't foolish to support the addiction in any way, but we always supported him. And we always, out of that has come our advocacy work that we do, because I think it's really important for people to understand. We were done demanding that his recovery looked a certain way, and Saul talked about this. Dead people can't recover. And so we believe in harm reduction, and we talk about that in our groups, and we have a lot of family members that have, had to wrestle through this. What if my kid's on methadone? What if my kid's on Suboxone? Is that really recovery? What if they don't want to go to a faith-based treatment program? Should I force them? I remember when Jake went to Teen Challenge the first time, we just thought he was going to come out with, wearing the perpetual black pants and white shirt and red tie, singing hymns. And it didn't work out that way, And we're really grateful for the wilderness program that he went to, which was his last program, because he just loved it, and it was perfect for him. And there's so many options for recovery pathways nowadays and treatment that's where we have to ask them, what do you want? What do you need? What do you think will work for you? And I want to tell you something. I want to tell you this story. Because sometimes Christians are so afraid of their kid to go to a secular treatment program. But here's how God works. We had a gal speak in our group last month. And she had been in dozens of treatment programs, in prison. And finally, she ended up in jail, and she was just mad, and she assaulted the guard. She spit at him. So she had to go into solitary confinement for 90 days. And she was banging on the door, and the guard opened it and threw her a Bible. And she said, I know that it takes exactly 30 days to read through the whole Bible because I did it 3 times while I was in solitary confinement. Now, do I think that jail is the right place for someone who struggles with addiction? Yeah, maybe not so much so. I think they need help and treatment. But it exemplifies how God can meet your person in any treatment center. You heard Saul. He wasn't in a Christian treatment center, right? And sometimes they are more amiable and willing to receive God as you understand it, right? Because honestly, like, the God that my son created through the 12 steps was probably more of a God than the God I believe in. You know, he was a good God. He was a fun God. He was a mountain climbing God. You know, he was a snowboarding God, right? He was not a God of judgment. He was a God of love. And so I think we have to really remember that anything is better than nothing. And if they say, I want to go to this place, you support it, right? Unless you know it's really dangerous. And there are some bad ones out there. I was done wasting precious moments that I couldn't get back. And we really purposed in the last 4.5, 5 years to really be intentional, to make moments count. And we even created moments, right? Where, and families are interesting, but we decided against advice to go out last Christmas and visit our son. And we were advised by some people not to go because of COVID. And we went anyway. And it was the last Christmas that we had with him. Do it anyway. Do it anyway. Whatever it is that you think you need to do, you do it. You make the phone call, you send the text. You sit with them, you play with them, you have fun with them. Because it might be the last moment that you get to do that, right? And maybe not theirs, maybe it's yours, right? Think about that. Like, think about that text message. And if it's mean or unkind, and the guilt that they would have to live with if something happened to you, right? So it's not just always about them. Because we never know when it might be our last moment here. Be kind. Have fun. Be loving. Be compassionate. Because that's what the Jesus I believe in would be. So, I just want to end it with, and there's a lot I could say, but again, the addiction didn't win, you guys. Hope wins. Hope always wins, right? Because of what we've learned, how we've grown, how God changed us, right? We got Lazarus time. And we know Jake's okay. And because of the way we loved him, we know we're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's what I wanted to share tonight. Thanks for letting me share. And I know I didn't say a lot of actually, I do want to say a couple things just ending up here. We have a table back there. We have some resources. So Thrive Family Support, we are full service family support organization. So we do resource navigation. We have vetted hundreds of treatment centers in Minnesota and throughout the country. So we don't do assessments, but we can actually, help guide someone where their person might need to go or what might be a good fit. For example, if someone's on Suboxone and needs to stay on Suboxone, Teen Challenge might not be the best treatment program for them, right? But there are others that do. We have support groups that we offer. We have one that meets in Lakeville on Thursday nights every week. We do topics. So what we help do is equip families in learning skills so that they can interact differently with their person. We do offer educational workshops, usually about one a quarter. We do advocacy, and we do peer coaching. So we have trained peers that help mentor other people. Everything that we do is informed by motivational interviewing, by acceptance and commitment therapy. There are therapeutic modalities that we've adapted to families. So there are things that work with, like motivational interviewing is like validating someone and affirming them and asking open-ended questions and things that are just good ways to communicate. So we just help families learn those skills. But then our groups have a faith component as well. So we have online groups, we have in-person groups. I also just want to mention out there, I wrote a book a few years ago called Praying Our Loved One Home, and that we will have some copies of that out there. If you're interested in purchasing one, they're $15. I want to mention my husband's ministry while we're all together. So out of this situation with our son Jake, what we saw was how, it came up when we were trying to figure out where Jake was going to go for treatment. He said, there's only 2 times I really feel in my natural state, and one is when I'm using and one is when I'm in nature, in the mountains. And there's something that happens out in nature that regulates our whole central nervous system. And so Paul has a ministry where he, we just say he takes broken people, which pretty much is anybody. I've been on his trips, they're amazing. And he takes them out to the wilderness. So he does week-long trips to Colorado, he does weekend trips down the St. Croix River. He's done trips to the BWCA, to the Superior National Hiking Trail. He's got some flyers out there. Of course, right now he's on his off season. They'll start up again in April, but they're amazing and they're very affordable. That's part of the mission, is to make it, really just covering costs. So if you have a loved one or we have women's trips if you're interested. And then I just have a couple other flyers out there you can grab. We think language matters. One thing you noticed when I talked, I didn't use the words alcoholic or addict, clean or dirty. I don't use words like codependency, enabling, because they evoke shame. And so we just believe in really using person-centered language. So we have a guide of language that can be helpful, and a lot of it goes back to our identity, right? My son's identity was not his disease. And I've never called myself a mom of an addict. And I probably won't call myself a bereaved mom. I hate those kind of labels. Like, I'm a child of God, that's it, there's a period after it. Mm-hmm. And the reason I can stand here is because long ago, I learned that my identity as a child of God didn't have anything to do with whether my son got well or not. Right? It was not ever about outcomes. If it had been about outcomes, we would be devastated right now. But it wasn't about outcomes, right? It was about being in the moment, being present, loving well. And so we don't use language, to identify us in any other way, but that we're God's children, and He loves us, right? I also have a resource list you can grab. I have certain resources that have been vetted that are in line with our philosophies of loving well, and so there's a list, you can grab them. Some of them are faith-based, some of them are not, but they're all really really life-changing books and websites and things like that. So with that, I'm just going to end by thanking you guys for letting me share. Kind of glad it was a smaller group tonight because it made it, and then I have my little cheering section. But it made it easier to talk about this tonight. And I really hope, whether it's someone in your life that struggles or anyone, because we all struggle, we're all broken, right? We're all broken. My broken just looks different than Jake's broken. And we're all broken. And we all need Jesus. That's what I got. If you have any questions, now's the time to ask. Feel free.